The air in the committee room didn't just feel heavy, it felt toxic. It smelled like floor wax, stale coffee, and the expensive, suffocating cologne Dr. Victor Sterling wore like a suit of armor. I stood at the mahogany podium, my palms so slick with sweat I was afraid the clicker would slide right out of my hand. This was it, the climax of 6 years of my life. 6 years of missing funerals, birthdays, and sleep. 6 years of being the ghost in the machine for the most famous cryptographer in the country. I looked at the committee. 5 professors, 5 gods of academia. In the center sat Dean Armitage, a man who looked like he was carved out of granite. To his right was my advisor, Dr. Sterling. He wasn't looking at my presentation. He was looking at his Rolex, tapping a manicured finger against the table. He looked bored. He looked like he was waiting for a nuisance to be over so he could go to lunch. Before Sun-hee begins her defense, Sterling said, his voice slicing through the silence like a cold blade. He didn't even look at me. He looked directly at the dean. I feel it's my ethical duty to clarify the provenance of the core discovery. While Sun-hee has been a diligent pair of hands in the lab, the Symmetric Bridge, the very foundation of this dissertation, was based on a series of private theoretical frameworks I developed in 2021. We are presenting it under her name today as a courtesy to ensure her funding remains compliant, but for the record, the intellectual property is, and always has been, the sole product of the Sterling Lab. The room went cold. I felt the blood drain from my face so fast I thought I might faint. Behind me, the projector displayed the title of my life's work, Neural Symmetric Cryptography. My work, my math, my sleepless nights. Sterling looked at me then, just for a second. He gave me this tiny, predatory smirk. It was the look of a man who knew he held every card. He was telling me, in front of the people who decided my fate, that I was nothing but a typist, a lab rat. He was stealing a patent worth tens of millions of dollars, right in front of my face. He expected me to take it. He expected me to be the good, quiet Asian girl he'd spent half a decade molding. He thought I'd bow my head, say thank you, doctor, and accept the degree while he walked away with the glory and the money. He had no idea. I felt a switch flip in my brain. The fear didn't go away, but it transformed. It turned into something sharp, something jagged, something cold. Actually, Dr. Sterling, I said, my voice didn't shake. It was the clearest it had been in years. The dean looked up, surprised. Since you've brought up the 2021 frameworks, I think it's only fair that the committee sees the actual documentation from that period, not just the version you've been selling to your private investors. Sterling's smirk didn't just vanish, it curdled. Sun-hee, don't be hysterical. This isn't the venue for, oh, this is exactly the venue, I interrupted. I didn't wait for him to finish. I reached for my laptop. I didn't click on the PowerPoint. I clicked on a hidden executable file on my desktop labeled ghost_protocol.exe. You see? I said, looking at the dean. Dr. Sterling has spent the last year telling you I was struggling with burnout. He told you I was unstable. What he didn't tell you was that while he was out having 3 martini lunches on the department's dime, I was installing a mirror on his private cloud server. On the giant projector screen, my presentation disappeared. In its place, a window opened. A stream of emails began to scroll by, emails between Dr. Victor Sterling and a private venture capital firm. Subject: removing the student. Once she defends, I'll file the misconduct charge. We'll have her deported by the end of the month, and the IP will be 100% clear for the sale. The silence in the room was so heavy, it felt like it was crushing the furniture. Sterling's face went from pale to a sickly mottled purple. But let me back up, I said, my heart drumming a war beat in my chest. Because to understand how a quiet student becomes a whistleblower, you have to understand exactly what kind of monster Victor Sterling really is. And you have to understand the 6 years of hell he put me through to get us to this room. I clicked a button, and the audio started playing. Sterling's own voice, recorded in his office, laughing about how he was going to gut the university for every cent it was worth. This wasn't a defense anymore. This was a funeral. And I was the one digging the grave. 6 years ago, I arrived at the university with nothing but a single hard-shell suitcase and a brain that felt like a hyperprocessor. I was 21 years old, a prodigy from Seoul National University who had spent her teenage years obsessed with the elegance of prime numbers. When I received my acceptance letter to work under Dr. Victor Sterling, my mother cried. We thought it was the American dream. We thought I was going to learn at the feet of a giant. The first 3 months were a carefully choreographed honeymoon phase. Sterling was charming. He was the kind of man who could convince a stone to bleed. He called me the future of the field. He walked me around the department like a trophy, introducing me to donors as his secret weapon from the East. But the secret weapon was quickly moved to the basement. Lab B12. That became my world. It was a windowless concrete box tucked away in the bowels of the engineering building, right next to the throwing HVAC units. It smelled like ozone, burnt solder, and the cheap instant coffee I drank to survive. My mentorship quickly devolved into a master-servant relationship that would have made a Victorian coal mine owner blush. Sun-Hai, I need these data sets cleaned by 6 a.m., he'd say, dropping a stack of papers or a corrupted drive on my desk at 9 p.m. on a Friday. But Dr. Sterling, I have my own coursework for the advanced cryptography seminar. The seminar is theory. Sun-Hee, this is real science. He'd bark, his voice losing that smooth, public-facing sheen. Do you want to be a student, or do you want to be a researcher? Because researchers don't sleep until the job is done. And frankly, your visa status depends on your standing in this lab, not some elective class. That was the first time he used the V word, the visa. It was his favorite leash. He knew that if I lost my spot in his lab, I had 30 days to leave the country. He knew my family had mortgaged their small apartment in Seoul to pay for my travel and initial costs. He owned me. By my second year, I was working 80-hour weeks. I wasn't just doing research, I was his personal assistant, his ghostwriter, and his tech support. I wrote his grant proposals, the ones that brought in $4 million from the Department of Defense. I watched him sign his name on the cover page while my name wasn't even mentioned in the footnotes. It's for the brand Sun-Hai, he'd explain, pouring himself a glass of expensive Highland Scotch while I stood in his office, my eyes bloodshot from a 36-hour coding binge. The DoD doesn't give money to unknown students. They give it to Victor Sterling. When you have your own lab, you'll do the same. It's the cycle of academia. I believed him. I was young, isolated, and culturally conditioned to respect the hierarchy. I thought this was the grind. I thought the exhaustion was a badge of honor. Then came the breakthrough. The Symmetric Bridge wasn't something Sterling conceptualized. It was a fluke of my own obsession. I was looking at a set of supposedly unbreakable quantum-resistant keys, and I saw a pattern, a mathematical fold, that allowed for instantaneous decryption if you applied a specific neural symmetric filter. It was the holy grail. It meant that every secure server on the planet was suddenly as open as a screen door. When I showed him the proof of concept in the basement, Sterling didn't celebrate. He didn't even smile. He went completely still. He looked at the screen for 10 minutes in total silence. Then, he reached over and unplugged my external drive. Is anyone else logged into this server? He asked, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. No, just me. Why? This stays off the network. Sun-Hai, this is a weapon. If the university gets wind of this, they'll tie it up in their IP office for decades. We need to protect it. From that day on, the isolation became absolute. He moved me to a private server that wasn't connected to the university backbone. He told the dean I was working on a sensitive government project and that no one, not even other faculty members, was allowed in Lab B12. He started gaslighting me about my own work. I looked at your latest iteration of the bridge, Sun-Hai, he'd say, leaning over my shoulder, his breath smelling of expensive cigars. It's sloppy. The math is derivative. Honestly, without the tweaks I made to core logic last night, this would be a failure. You're lucky I'm here to guide you. I would look at my code. I would see exactly what I had written. He hadn't changed a single semicolon, but he said it with such conviction, with such authority, that I started to doubt my own eyes. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was losing my mind. He began refiling my notes. He took my physical journals and locked them in his office safe for security. He told me that if I discussed the project with anyone, even my mother, it would be a breach of national security protocols and I'd be in a federal prison before my plane touched down Korea. The psychological toll was devastating. I stopped eating. I stopped talking to the few friends I had. I became a ghost haunting the basement. I watched from the shadows as Sterling took credit for my smaller breakthroughs at international conferences. I saw him on the news, the brilliant architect of the new digital age, while I sat in a windowless room debugging the very system he was bragging about. The breaking point of the setup happened during the 4th year. I found a folder on his desk while I was dropping off a revised chapter of my dissertation. It was a contract with a company called Aegis Cyber Systems. It was a consulting agreement. Sterling was being paid $250,000 a year just to sit on their board. In exchange, he had promised them exclusive first-look access to a revolutionary new encryption bridge. My bridge. The contract was dated 6 months before I had even finalized the math. He had been selling my brain before I had even finished thinking. And in the fine print, it mentioned that the technology was solely authored and owned by Dr. Victor Sterling. I realized then that I wasn't his student. I wasn't even his assistant. I was a proprietary piece of software he was developing in a basement. And once the software was finished, the developer, me, was an unnecessary expense. I stood in his office, the moonlight hitting the mahogany furniture, and for the first time in my life, I felt a cold, hard rage that didn't have a bottom. I didn't put the folder back. I took a photo of every single page with my phone. I looked at the scotch bottle on his desk. I looked at the awards on his wall, all of them built on the backs of students like me who were too afraid to speak up. "Okay, Victor," I whispered. "You want to play the genius? Let's see how you handle a system you didn't actually build." I went back to the basement. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't code for him. I started building the Ghost Protocol. I began writing a secondary layer into the Symmetric Bridge, a layer that looked like a security patch, but was actually a digital trapdoor. I was going to give him exactly what he wanted. I was going to give him the most powerful encryption in history, but I was going to make sure that the only person who held the master key was the diligent pair of hands he thought he had crushed. The next 18 months were a masterclass in psychological warfare. To Victor Sterling, I was still the broken, compliant lab rat. I perfected the art of the tired shuffle. I wore the same oversized hoodie for days. I let my hair get messy and kept my eyes fixed on the floor whenever he entered the room. I wanted him to feel absolute, undisputed dominance. I wanted him to be so comfortable in his arrogance that he became sloppy. It worked. As the Symmetric Bridge neared completion, Sterling's narcissism reached a fever pitch. He stopped even pretending to consult me on the theoretical frameworks. He spent his days in the office, door closed, yelling at Silicon Valley execs about his valuation. Meanwhile, in Lab B12, I was a digital surgeon. Every time I updated the core repository, I added a shadow commit. To anyone looking at the surface code, it was just standard optimization, junk data to handle latency. But hidden in the noise was the Ghost Protocol. It was a sophisticated Trojan horse that did two things. First, it mirrored his entire private server to an encrypted offshore drive I'd set up using a burner identity. Second, it created a per-kill switch tied to a specific sequence of keystrokes that could only be executed during a live server environment, like a defense presentation. But I didn't just want his money. I wanted his soul. I wanted the committee to see the rot beneath the tweed suits. Using the mirror, I began harvesting his digital life. I stayed up until 4 a.m. every night, sifting through years of his deleted emails. I found the dark ledger. It turned out Sterling wasn't just a thief of ideas, he was a thief of state. I discovered that he had been double-dipping on federal grants for a decade. He would take $500,000 from the Navy for research, then take another $500,000 from the Department of Energy for the exact same research, essentially laundering the surplus through a shell company he'd set up in the Cayman Islands. He called the company V. Sterling Consulting. Creative, right? The deeper I dug, the more I found. There were chains of emails with a woman named Elena, a research consultant who was actually a high-end mistress he was paying for with university travel funds. He'd booked a cryptography symposium in Maui that cost the school $20,000, but the GPS data from his uploaded photos showed him on a private yacht 300 miles away from a conference center. He's not even a scientist anymore, I whispered to my monitor, the blue light reflecting in my tired eyes. He's just a parasite. The tension in the lab became physical. Sterling started getting paranoid as the defense date approached. He installed a new biometric lock on the lab door, one that I didn't have the code for. He didn't realize I'd already installed a hardware keylogger on his office computer weeks prior. I watched him type the code 666-KING through a hidden camera I'd rigged in a smoke detector. It was almost too easy. It was insulting. One afternoon, he called me into his office. He was looking at a printout of my latest simulation. "This bridge, it's holding up in the stress tests, son," but I notice a slight lag in the decryption header. Section 4.2. Why? My heart hammered against my ribs. He was actually looking at the code. If he looked too closely, he might see the shadow commits. "It's the quantum noise floor, Victor," I said, my voice small and trembling. I played the scared girl card. "I've been trying to smooth it out, but my math, maybe I'm just not fast enough. I'm sorry." He let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Finally, an admission of reality. "Don't worry, Sunhai. I'll take a look at it tonight. I'll fix your noise. Just focus on the presentation slides. Make sure my name is twice as large as yours on the title card. Actually, just put me as the primary and move yourself to the contributor list." "Of course," I said, bowing slightly. As soon as I left the room, I checked my phone. My keylogger caught him opening the file. I watched in real time as he fixed the code. He deleted a vital security patch and replaced it with a flawed logic loop he'd used in 2015. He was literally breaking the system because he thought his old work was superior. I smiled. He was doing my work for me. By fixing the code, he was creating a massive, glaring vulnerability that I could exploit during the defense. He was handing me the detonator. But then, the stakes got higher. I intercepted a message between him and a contact at a major tech conglomerate. Let's call them Big Blue. "The student is getting suspicious," Sterling wrote. "She's been asking about the patent filings. I've initiated the academic misconduct protocol. I have a forged set of journals from her time in Seoul that show she's been plagiarizing the core symmetric logic from a Professor Pax. I'll discover them the morning of the defense. It'll be a clean break. She goes home in disgrace. We get the $20 million acquisition." $20 million. That was the price of my life. I stood in the middle of Lab B12, surrounded by the hum of servers that didn't belong to me, in a country that didn't want me, working for a man who wanted to erase me. I felt a surge of adrenaline so powerful I thought my veins might burst. He thought he was the hunter. He thought he was playing a high-stakes game of chess, but he was playing against the person who had designed the board, the pieces, and the very air he was breathing. I sat down at my terminal. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I opened a new file. Command, initiate final phase. I began uploading the dark ledger to a scheduled blast list, the University Ethics Committee, the FBI Cybercrimes Division, the Department of Defense's Inspector General, and every major tech journalist in the country. The timer was set. Execution time, 3:15 p.m. Exactly 15 minutes into my PhD defense. "You want a show, Victor?" I whispered, my fingers flying across the keys. "I'm going to give you a premiere the whole world will see." I spent the rest of the week being the perfect broken student. I even let him yell at me about the font choice on slide 15. I apologized for wasting his time. I was a ghost. I was a shadow. I was a countdown. The night before the defense, I went to the lab one last time. I packed my single suitcase. I cleaned my desk. I left nothing behind but a single post-it note inside Sterling's favorite world's best advisor mug. It was blank. I walked out of the engineering building into the cool night air. For the first time in 6 years, I didn't feel like a student. I felt like a storm. The morning of the defense was gray, the kind of sky that looked like it was made of wet slate. I woke up at 5 a.m., not because of an alarm, but because my body had forgotten how to process rest. My apartment was empty. Everything I owned was packed into that one suitcase. If this failed, I'd be on the plane by midnight. If it worked, I'd be the most dangerous woman in the building. At 8 a.m., a text from Sterling buzzed on my nightstand. My office. Now, don't be late. When I walked into his office, the world's best advisor mug was steaming on his desk. He wasn't wearing his usual blazer. He was in a crisp white shirt with gold cufflinks. He looked like a man about to be crowned king. On the desk sat a thick manila folder and a single, heavy fountain pen. "Sit down, Soon-hee," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He didn't look up from his tablet. I sat. The air in the room felt thick, like walking through chest-high water. "I've been thinking about the defense today," he started, finally looking at me. His eyes were cold, dead things. "And I've been thinking about your future. You're a talented girl, but you have a tendency toward instability, a certain creative approach to the truth." "I don't know what you mean, Dr. Sterling," I said, playing the part of the confused mouse one last time. He slammed the manila folder onto the desk. It made a sound like a gunshot. "Don't lie to me. I found them, Sun-hai. The journals from your time in Seoul. The ones where you clearly borrowed the core logic for the Symmetric Bridge from Professor Pax. I have the side-by-side comparisons. I have the dates. It's a textbook case of academic theft." I looked at the folder. Inside were forged documents, clumsy ones. But in the world of high-stakes academia, even a rumor of plagiarism is a death sentence. He had spent his night fabricating my downfall. "I didn't steal anything," I whispered. "You know that's not real." "It doesn't matter what I know," Sterling hissed, leaning across the desk. "It matters what the committee sees. And they will see a fraud, unless," he pushed the fountain pen toward me. Underneath it was a voluntary exit and intellectual property transfer agreement. "Sign this. You admit the Symmetric Bridge was entirely my conceptual framework and that you are merely a data entry assistant. In exchange, I overlook these journals. I let you defend. I give you a passing grade. You get your degree. You pack your bags. And you disappear. You never work in cryptography again. You go back to Korea and find a nice desk job in a bank. Do you understand?" "You're asking me to sign my own execution," I said. "I'm giving you a way out," he shouted, his face turning a dark, bruised purple. "You think you're a genius. You're a student. You're a line of code in my spreadsheet. Without me, you're just another immigrant with a visa that's about to expire. I built this lab. I built this department. Everything in this room belongs to me, including your thoughts." He stood up, towering over me. He grabbed my shoulder, not enough to leave a bruise, but enough to show he could. "Sign it. Now. Or I call the dean and we cancel the defense. I have campus security escort you out and I'll file the misconduct charge before you hit the parking lot. Your mother's house is on the line, isn't it? Think about her." He was vibrating with a sick kind of triumph. He really thought he had me. He thought the V word and the threat of shame were enough to break my spirit forever. I looked at the pen. I looked at the man who had been my mentor for 6 years. I didn't see a scientist. I didn't see a giant. I saw a small, pathetic thief who was terrified that the world would find out he was a fraud. I picked up the pen. "Good girl," Sterling purred, his grip on my shoulder loosening. "I knew you were smart. I didn't sign the document. Instead, I uncapped the pen and drew a single, thick line across the entire first page, crossing out his name. "I'll see you in the committee room, Victor," I said, my voice as cold as a winter morning in Seoul. And You might want to check the server logs one more time. You missed a few updates. I stood up and walked out before he could find his voice. I didn't look back, even when I heard him scream my name. I didn't look back when I heard his chair flip over or the sound of his scotch glass shattering against the wall. I went straight to the university's main auditorium. I had 3 hours. I spent those 3 hours in a bathroom stall, shaking. Not with fear, but with the sheer, raw energy of someone who had just jumped off a cliff and realized they had wings. At 1 p.m., I walked into the committee room. My laptop was in my bag. The ghost protocol was live. The dark ledger was queued. Sterling entered 10 minutes later, looking impeccably composed, though his eyes were bloodshot. He didn't look at me. He sat at the table with the dean and the 3 other professors, his hands folded neatly. "Shall we begin?" Dean Armitage asked. I stood at the podium. I looked at the men who held the keys to my life. I looked at Victor Sterling, who was smiling, a thin, oily smile that said, "I'm going to destroy you anyway." "Thank you, Dean," I said, clicking the remote. Today, we aren't just discussing the Symmetric Bridge. We're discussing the cost of secrets and the price of theft. The screen flickered to life. The first slide wasn't my title page. It was a high-resolution photo of the contract Sterling had tried to force me to sign 3 hours ago, with the big, black line through his name. The room went silent. I could hear the hum of the projector. "Wait, what is this?" the dean asked, squinting. "This," I said, "is the end of the Sterling lab." I looked at Victor. His face had gone from pale to a shade of white I'd never seen on a living person. "Let's start from the beginning," I said. The room didn't just go quiet, it became a vacuum. Dean Armitage leaned forward, his spectacles slipping down his nose as he stared at the projected image of the IP transfer agreement I had defaced in Sterling's office. I didn't give Victor a second to recover. I didn't give him a chance to call for a technical intermission. Before we discussed the mathematics, I said, my voice projecting with a resonance I didn't know I possessed, "We must discuss the architecture of the Sterling lab, because for 6 years, this hasn't been a place of learning. It has been a clearinghouse for intellectual theft and federal fraud." "Sun-Hee, that is enough," Sterling erupted, slamming his hand on the table. He turned to the dean, his face a mask of simulated concern. "Dean, I warned you. The student is having a psychotic break. The stress of the defense, she's become delusional. We need to stop this immediately and get her medical attention." Dean Armitage looked at the screen, then at Sterling, then back to me. "Dr. Sterling, sit down. Sun High, this is a dissertation defense. If you have a grievance, there are channels." "The channels are clogged with his influence," Dean, I interrupted. "So I built my own. You asked about the Symmetric Bridge. Dr. Sterling claimed this morning, and just moments ago, that this was his conceptual framework, that I was just a diligent pair of hands. So let's test that theory." I hit a key on my laptop. The screen split into 2 windows. On the left was the master logic Sterling had submitted to the university's patent office under his own name. On the right was a live running terminal of my Ghost Protocol script. Dr. Sterling has spent the last year selling this technology to private equity firms. He told them it was his, but Dr. Sterling doesn't actually know how it works. Because if he did, he would have noticed the intemperance poisoning I built into the OR 4.2 module. "What are you talking about?" one of the other professors, a world-class mathematician named Dr. Vance, asked, leaning in. "I'm talking about the fact that this system is a trap," I said. "Dr. Sterling optimized my code last night. He thought he was removing my sloppy math. What he actually did was delete the only safety regulator holding back a recursive logic loop. In exactly 3 minutes, every server currently running the Sterling protocol will enter a hard lock state. The only way to unlock them is a 256-bit key that, well, Victor, I believe you told me you personally calibrated that module, so you should have the key, right? Sterling's eyes darted to his own laptop. He started typing furiously, his fingers trembling. I knew what he was seeing. A red countdown timer had appeared on his screen. There must be a bug, Sterling stammered, his cool exterior finally cracking. Sun High, what did you do to my files? Your files, Victor, I asked. If they are yours, fix them. Show the committee your genius. Show them how the Symmetric Bridge handles a recursive entropy spike. He couldn't. He didn't even know where the spike was originating. He was staring at the code he had stolen as if it were written in an alien language, because, to him, it was. He had never understood the why behind my how. While Dr. Sterling tries to remember his own math, I continued, let's look at the dark ledger. Since you all have your university-issued tablets, I suggest you check your inboxes. At 3:15 p.m., 1 minute ago, a scheduled data burst was sent to the Ethics Committee, the Department of Justice, and the Inspector General. The room was suddenly filled with a synchronized ping of notifications. The dean picked up his tablet. His face went from confusion to a deep, stony gray. This is, Armitage whispered. Victor, is this a record of a shell company in the Caymans? Under your home address? It's a lie. It's all fabricated, Sterling screamed. He was standing now, his chair pushed back so hard it hit the wall. She's a hacker. She's a criminal. She's trying to ruin me because I wouldn't let her pass. I'm not ruining you, Victor, I said, walking around the podium to stand directly in front of him. I was 5'2" and he was over 6 feet, but in that moment, he looked like a frightened child. I'm just making you transparent. I'm showing them the sterling polish you were so proud of. On the projector, the ghost protocol reached 0. The screen turned blood red. Across the top, in giant letters, it read, System Total Lock. Architect, Sun High Park. The Navy's test servers just went dark, I told the committee. The private equity firm in Palo Alto, their demo just crashed, and the only person who can bring them back online is the unstable student you are planning to deport. I turned back to the dean. I have the full, uncorrupted logs of every second I spent in Lab B12. I have the original timestamps for every line of code, dating back 3 years before Dr. Sterling even knew what a symmetric bridge was. I have his emails planning to frame me for plagiarism. I have it all. I reached into my bag and pulled out a physical, bound copy of my true dissertation, the one with no contributor lists, no Sterling names, and the actual functional math. I placed it on the table in front of Dean Armitage. I'm not here to ask for a degree anymore, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that filled every corner of the silent room. I'm here to take back my life. And I'm here to make sure that when Victor Sterling leaves this building, it's in the back of a federal vehicle. Sterling tried to lung for my laptop, a pathetic, desperate move. But Dr. Vance, the mathematician, caught his arm. Don't, Victor, Vance said, his voice dripping with disgust. You've done enough, more than enough. I stood there, watching the man who had tried to erase me fall apart. He wasn't a giant. He was a thief who had finally run out of things to steal. The auditorium doors didn't just open. They were thrown back with the weight of institutional authority. 2 campus security officers entered first, followed by 3 men in dark charcoal suits who didn't belong to the university. They had the unmistakable, humorless gait of federal agents. The dark ledger hadn't just reached the dean. It had reached the Department of Justice's Cybercrimes Division. Sterling was still panting. His hair, usually lacquered into a perfect silver wave, was matted with sweat and hanging over his forehead. He looked at the agents, then at the dean, then back at me. He was looking for a crack in the wall, a way to spin the narrative, but the room was made of mirrors. Victor Sterling? The lead agent asked. He didn't wait for an answer. He pulled a folder from his breast pocket. We have a warrant for the seizure of all electronic devices and records associated with the Sterling Lab and V. Sterling Consulting. We are also here to escort you to the field office for questioning regarding the misappropriation of federal research grants and wire fraud. This is a mistake, Sterling shouted, his voice cracking, hitting a pathetic high-pitched note. My student, she's compromised the system. She's holding the university's data hostage. You should be arresting her. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just watched him. Dean Armitage stood up. He looked aged, as if the last 20 minutes had carved new lines into his face. He looked at Sterling with a mixture of pity and absolute revulsion. Victor, the dean said, his voice heavy, the data son he provided isn't just a claim. We've already verified the offshore account numbers. They match the discretionary fund transfers you requested for the Maui Symposium. And as for the hostage data, I think we've seen enough to know whose data it actually is. The agents moved in. One of them took Sterling by the arm. The transition from titan of industry to criminal suspect took exactly 4 seconds. As they began to lead him toward the door, Sterling stopped. He twisted his head back to look at me, his eyes burning with a localized, poisonous hatred. You think you won, he spat, a bit of foam flecking his lip. You're nothing. You're a ghost. Tomorrow, nobody will remember your name. They'll just remember the scandal. You've destroyed the lab. You've destroyed your own career. Who's gonna hire a whistleblower? Who's gonna trust a girl who burns down her own house? I walked toward him, stopping just inches away from his face. I could smell the sourness of his fear and the expensive scotch he'd been drinking since breakfast. I didn't burn down the house, Victor. I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet it felt like it filled the entire hall. I just turned on the lights. And as for my career, I don't need Sterling on my resume anymore, because the tech you just tried to sell for $20 million, it's currently useless without me. I reached out and pulled the master architect badge from his lapel, a stupid honorary piece of plastic he wore to these events. You told me once that the sterling polish was what made the math real, I said, dropping the badge into his half-empty water glass. But it turns out the math was the only thing that was ever real. You were just the packaging, and the world is done with the package. Sterling lunged at me then, a desperate, clumsy snarl of a man, but the agents were faster. They forced his arms behind his back, the metallic click of handcuffs echoing off the wood-paneled walls. It was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The committee watched in stunned silence as he was marched out of the room. The king of cryptography was being led away in cheap steel, shouting about lawyers and his patents until the heavy doors muffled his voice into nothingness. The room was quiet again, except for the hum of the projector and the blood-red screen that still read, System Total Lock. I turned back to the committee. The 4 remaining professors were looking at me as if they were seeing a new species for the first time. Dr. Vance was the first to speak. He looked at the bound dissertation I placed on the table, the real one. Son He said, his voice hesitant. If what you've shown us is true, the level of complexity in the 4.2 module, how long did it take you to build the failsafe? 18 months, I said. I built it in the hours between the tasks Dr. Sterling gave me. I built it while I was resting from the 80-hour weeks. Dr. Vance nodded slowly, a look of genuine academic awe crossing his face. And the key? Can you actually unlock the Navy servers? I can, I said, but I won't be doing it as a student of the Sterling Lab. I'll be doing it as the sole patent holder and primary investigator of the HARC protocol. My lawyer, the one I hired with the money I made freelancing for the very firm Sterling was trying to scam, is waiting in the hallway with the paperwork for the university to sign. The dean sat back down, rubbing his temples. I think, he said, we've moved past the defense portion of the afternoon. We need to go to my office. All of us. One thing first, Dean. I said. I walked back to the podium, typed the final command into my laptop, and hit enter. The red screen vanished. In its place, a single image appeared. It was a photo of me and my mother in Seoul, taken the day I got my acceptance letter, the same moment I used with a lie to sell my dad. I'm ready to graduate. The fallout from the park defense was a tectonic shift that leveled the university's engineering department. Within 48 hours, the story was on the front page of every major tech journal. The headline in the Wall Street Journal read, "The Ghost in the Machine: How a PhD Student Toppled a Silicon Valley Titan." Victor Sterling's fall was spectacular. The federal investigation, fueled by the gigabytes of data from my dark ledger, uncovered a decade of systemic fraud. He wasn't just double-dipping on grants, he was selling proprietary university research to foreign entities through his Cayman shell companies. He lost his tenure, his pension, and his reputation in a single afternoon. 6 months later, he took a plea deal to avoid 20 years in federal prison. He's currently serving 7 years in a white-collar facility where his only sterling Polish is spent on the floors of the prison library. The university tried to play damage control at first. Their lawyers approached me with a generous settlement offer, a quiet degree, and a 6-figure hush money check. I laughed in their faces. "I don't want a check." I told the dean in his mahogany row office, my own legal team sitting behind me, "I want the full IP rights, I want an official public apology, and I want the Lab B12 basement closed forever. It's an OSHA nightmare and a tomb for ambition." I got all of it. The university, desperate to avoid a massive RICO lawsuit, conceded everything. They issued a formal statement acknowledging me as the sole architect of the Symmetric Bridge. They even offered me a faculty position. I turned it down. I was done with the ivory tower. Today, 3 years later, I don't live in a basement. I live in a penthouse in San Francisco. I am the CEO of Neo-Symmetric Systems. We don't just build encryption, we build ethics into our code. Half of my senior engineering team are refugees from other toxic academic labs, brilliant minds who were tired of having their names erased. My mother lives in a beautiful house in Seoul now, overlooking the Han River. She still doesn't quite understand what quantum cryptography is, but she understands the look of peace on my face when we video call every Sunday. Sometimes late at night, I pull up the old server logs from the night of the defense. I look at that red screen, system total lock. It serves as a reminder. In the world of high-stakes science, people will tell you that the name on the door is what matters. They'll tell you that you're just a pair of hands, a line in a spreadsheet, a ghost. But they forget one thing about ghosts. We are the ones who know where the bodies are buried. And if you push us far enough, we're the ones who will pull the house down around you. Dr. Victor Sterling thought he was the architect. He thought he was the king. But he was just a man who forgot that the most dangerous person in the room is the one who has nothing left to lose and the brains to take everything back. I'm Sunhee Park, PhD, and I'm finally, truly graduated.